we're not going to continue that series in China.
Okay. I think you can see what my concerns are, but just so that I'm absolutely crystal clear about it, here's my concern.
Yes.
My concern is that the communist government in China has systematically attempted to use and influence American sports organizations and lots of other entities, our media, entertainment industry, companies, lots of them. They're not shy about using leverage. And we've used the term sports washing a lot today. I think it's applicable on this situation. And Senator Blumenthal referenced earlier the brutal crackdown in Hong Kong, which I guess I'll call it the privilege. Maybe it's the misfortune of seeing for myself firsthand on the streets there. And while that was going on, what was China doing? What was Beijing doing? They were applying maximal pressure on the NBA that had a lot of contracts very lucrative with China. The chairman mentioned Daryl Morey, at the time general manager of the Houston Rockets, who ventured the most, frankly, anodyne statement in support of the people of Hong Kong. I mean, it was the most moderate little, I think it was a tweet. For this, he was blasted by NBA players, certainly by China, by owners, by his own owner. Ultimately, he resigned. So it worries me when I see the PGA doing business with the Chinese government, subjecting its players and this association that you've lauded so much today to those same pressures from a government that is brutal, that is repressive, and that is attempting to use American institutions as a megaphone for their own totalitarian, dystopian, and frankly, evil policies. When you imprison millions of people in concentration camps for the purpose of eradicating their religious beliefs and killing them, and that's what they're doing with the Uyghurs, you're an evil regime. When you treat your own people as slaves, and that's what they're doing, you are an evil regime. I don't want to see American institutions co-opted by that regime. That's where I'm coming from with this. I would hope we'd share that perspective. So I look forward to your responses in writing us to the status of your business agreement. I continue to be interested as to why on your Form 990 in both 2018 when this deal was announced and in 2020 after your event, this wasn't disclosed. I'd like to know why that is. And I'd like your assurances that your commitment that you're not going to restart this series in China and you're not going to conduct business operations with millions of dollars in financing from Chinese entities. Will you give me that commitment?
Senator, I'd be happy to give you the information on the status of our contract in China, and I'll certainly follow up with you with regard to the disclosures in the 990. You know, as I've stated, we have no intentions of continuing that series from my perspective. And I can't commit the tour for the long term. I'm not in a position to do that. But there's nothing in the short term or immediate future that, from a tournament standpoint, that we're considering doing in China.
I would just say finally, Mr. Chairman, that I think that the era in which institutions, sports leagues, businesses, when they say it with regard to communist China, that, well, we leave the politics to other people, we just don't take any position on issues, I think that time has passed. When you have a government that is as oppressive and imperial as that government is, and is doing to its people what that government is, and has designs to do to others around the world what that government wants to do, I think it's time for American companies, American institutions to stand up and be counted. And I hope that the PGA will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hawley. And that is exactly why we're here today. That is why we are conducting this investigation and why we will broaden it as appropriate to include other institutions and other repressive regimes and their potential impact on our institutions, whether it's corporations or sports organizations. And I would just say, recently at the Qatar World Cup, FIFA prohibited players from wearing armbands with rainbow flags. We don't know whether Qatar imposed this requirement on FIFA or if FIFA just wanted to avoid controversy when it made its own deal with a repressive government, but the effect had a ban on free expression. This effort to restrict, punish, torture, imprison, kill people who stand up for their beliefs is a growing worldwide phenomenon. And I would hope that it would unite us on a bipartisan basis. Can you commit, Mr. Price, that the tour would never agree to a similar restriction if Saudi Arabia, which has a particularly troubling record on LGBTQ rights, wanted you to do it?
Senator, we believe in full access to our events. From a participation standpoint, from an attendance standpoint, we don't believe in any restrictions on that. If we
So
reach,
is the answer yes?
Senator, we control.
You would never agree to it. You would never punish your players. You would reject Saudi Arabia or the governor of the Sovereign Wealth Fund if they sought to impose that restriction, and you would never impose it yourself.
We would never impose it, and we determine where our events are played, and we would not conduct tournaments under those rules,
So you wouldn't do it in Saudi Arabia.
not according to those rules.
Let me ask you, I mentioned earlier the side agreement, the apparent side agreement involving Greg Norman. Was that ever executed?
No, sir.
Is it your understanding that there is an agreement that he will no longer have his present position? That's in the talking points that you prepared for Mr. Monahan.
Yes, sir. Under the framework agreement, if we are able to move to a definitive agreement and it's approved, the LIV Golf assets, for which Greg Norman is currently the commissioner, will move into a new subsidiary, PGA Tour subsidiary, controlled by the PGA Tour. And those events will be managed by the PGA Tour. We have a complete infrastructure in place to manage events. It would make no sense to bring in that type of an executive to manage what is now a 14 series of events.
So just to be clear, he's out of a job.
If we reach a definitive agreement, we would not have a requirement for that type of position.
Our review of internal documents indicates that there are other understandings and agreements. Would you tell us about them?
I'm not aware of any other understanding or agreements that's not reflected in the framework agreement, which is still to be negotiated. Everything is to be negotiated.
What are the other side agreements or informal understandings?
I'm not aware of any other side agreements or informal understandings.
Is that because you're not permitted to talk about them, or because there are none absolutely?
None exist to my knowledge.
Okay. Let me ask you, when were you first informed about these negotiations that have been described by Mr. Dunn and the documents?
Senator Commissioner Monahan informed me shortly before the London meeting that we might have an opportunity to engage with the Public Investment Fund to settle the litigation and potentially to establish a framework where the PGA Tour would be in a position to continue lead professional golf.
Were any of the other independent directors on the board informed about the conversations or negotiation?
Senator, our director, Jimmy Dunn, was obviously aware. And
I should have been clearer, aside from Mr. Dunn, who was involved in the negotiation.
Our board chair, Ed Hurley, was aware of the negotiations.
By the way, with respect to Mr. Hurley, he is the co-chairman of Wachtell Lipton.
Yes.
Were they involved in providing legal advice?
Yes.
Were they representing you or advising you in the litigation?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn, you've been involved with business governance for, I would say, decades. Is it common to keep these kinds of negotiations secret from a corporation's governing body? Strikes me as remarkable.
Senator, every negotiation, every deal has its own rhythm. This framework agreement settled the litigation and then said, we're going to keep talking. We were really afraid that once the other side's lawyers learned anything about it, it would be poof, gone.
But most corporations trust their boards of directors. In fact, they're intimately involved. They're informed. One of your board has resigned because of this breach of common trust and practice. Wouldn't you say this is pretty unique in your experience?
What I would say, Senator, was that the conversations, I think, were fragile. And I really felt that on the Saturday, I guess it's Memorial Day, I thought they were over, frankly. And we did have a discussion earlier on where I mentioned to the chairman and to the commissioner, I said that, you know, we ought to do this, and the chairman said that that's the commissioner's decision, and the commissioner said, we'll decide when we decide. And my understanding is he had the authority to sign the agreement, which is simply terminates the lawsuit, and then with the knowledge that everything else was going to have to be discussed after that. Now, that's all I can say about that. That's all I know about that.
But you would agree that most corporations, most executives, CEOs feel a duty. In fact, I would argue that legally as well as morally, they have a duty to keep their boards of directors informed. Why this near unique secrecy with your own board of directors? Simply you didn't trust them.
You know, Senator, I've been to 2 board meetings. I started in I started in January, so I was not an expert on the dynamic of the board, very honestly.
The bed was on fire when you got into it.
No, LIV put us on fire. LIV put us in an incredibly difficult position. LIV was a constant every day. Who's going to go? It was very disruptive.
I'm going to come back to LIV's disruptive effect when I return. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to vote. We have a vote ongoing right now, and I apologize. I will have some additional questions. When I come back, I'm going to turn to the ranking member, and I'll be back. We're in the middle of a vote right now. I'll be back within a matter of a few minutes.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you go, I mean, did the board object to the fact that the lawsuit was dismissed? I mean, once it was finally revealed, did anybody on the board say, hey, this is awful, we should continue to engage in this legal action?
The one, no, they did not. The reality was, in fact, Mr. Stevenson described it to me as like that this is just a litigation settlement. There's really not much to this. That's what, but he was not happy about not knowing about it.
And again,
you got to ask him.
We can emphasize again, there is no deal.
There's no deal. There's no agreement. There's a settlement of the lawsuit, and we're talking, and we're trying to see if we could do something that makes sense for our players, sponsors, fans. That's what we're trying to do. Really hard.
And this is not making it any easier. I mean, let's be honest. This is not making your job any easier.
Well, if you're addressing me, Senator, you know, Ron is doing the negotiation, and the fact, but he being here in Washington, worrying about this, consumed with this, no, it's making it a lot harder, a lot harder.
So, I mean, I can say some things, but the chairman's not here to hear them. But I'll say them anyway. From my viewpoint, I don't see the PGA as doing anything wrong here. And unfortunately, from some of my colleagues, the line of their questioning implies that there's something nefarious or something wrong, or that you violated, you know, for example, your duty to the board. Can you just address that? Mr. Price, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Senator. No, certainly from our point of view, we faced an existential threat, as you indicated earlier. Our sole purpose was to preserve our existence so that we could continue to benefit our constituents, our players, and charity, and our ability to continue to lead professional golf, and as a result, get in a position of where LIV Golf was not leading professional golf and controlling golf for its operations. And the negotiations were confidential, so that surprised a lot of people. And that was, unfortunate that we had to surprise people, but it was necessary. As Jimmy has said, or otherwise, the deal we would not have been able to reach an agreement.
And by the way, I fully understand that had the other side's lawyers gotten wind of this, they would have seen, a bunch of legal fees just going up in smoke, right? And they would have done everything possible to tank the dismissal of the lawsuit, because there's no deal, there's a framework, but the only thing definitive is you were able to get that legal liability off your plate, correct?
That's correct, Senator.
Now, there have been an awful lot of questions and comments, and you've been asked to give different assurances in terms of what the PGA Tour will do or won't do. I want to give you the opportunity, while nobody else here at the dais, describe what the tour actually is. Who your duty is to. What your duty is not. I mean, obviously, you're human beings. You don't like to see repressive regimes. From a business standpoint, you've got a way, if you involve yourself in a country that's doing things that maybe your fan base wouldn't approve of, I mean, you'd have to certainly, factor that into your decision whether or not you hold a tournament somewhere or not.
Correct.
Mr. Dunn, you talked about, I think very convincingly, that you love this game of golf. You think that golf can help repair breaches, right?
Yes.
Well, talk a little bit about just the game of golf being able to use globally. Again, we talked about meritocracy. There doesn't make any difference what kind of race you are. Literally, it doesn't make any difference. If you can shoot a lower score than anybody else, you're going to compete at the highest level. But just talk about what you think the game of golf can do for the world.
Well, I'm very jaded on this, but I have a tremendous respect and appreciation and love for the game of golf. Just in the world prospect, and I know there's been a lot of discussion about 9/11 and involvement, but there's 30. If you look at even in Saudi Arabia, I think there are 18 million young men and Saudi women that are under the age 32, and I think it would be good if they didn't think every American hated them, because they had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. And I think that golf can be a force throughout the world. Now, with respect to that, Senator, we would not be negotiating with them. They wouldn't have been the first pick. But first of all, we didn't need money.
You didn't choose.
No. We got to the table because of the situation at hand, which is the vulnerability to the tour. And the tour, one thing that's really come out, and it's very important, is the top 50 at the tour at that moment are critical to the viability of the tour and what it will be going forward. So if you lose a number of those players, sponsors become very unhappy. You don't have the level of competition. We would like the best players playing against each other all the time. We'd like to be able to have that product, but still protect the inches of the tour. So there are just so many things that we could do correctly if we could have the game united in level of competition. I think the competition could go up so level, the interest could go up so much, and you could see situations like it wasn't a tour event, but in the U.S. Open. Now, you know, a guy won that tournament that it was amazing how he was able to do that. And it's just something special and unique.
But I would say, and again, it was just fun watching Wyndham Clark.
Oh, he was awesome.
Okay, I mean, just, he's got to keep it all together
Oh.
until he sinks that final putt, and then you see the tension flow out of him. But the fact of the matter is, had it been a bunch of players whose nobody knew their name, it might have been the U.S. Open. People still might have tuned in, but if it had been another tournament, you wouldn't have had the viewership, you wouldn't have had the audience, you wouldn't have had the revenue, you wouldn't have attracted the sponsor, and week in and week out, if that's what the PGA Tour looks like, just a lesser tour, you know, without the stars, and that hurts everybody in the games of golf, except for the Saudis who have an unlimited bank account that want to buy their way into the game of golf. I mean, that's the reality you faced.
You know, Senator, I've competed in business my whole life, and generally there are economic principles that make sense that you have to apply, and within that framework, you better get smarter, you better get tougher, you've got to get more knowledgeable, you got to work harder, you got to do all the things that frankly have made America great. This situation is different. You know, you know, to give a charity $50 million, it takes a lot of work to create that. It's a very different deal here. And if you...
Let's, you know, Mr. Price, let's talk about the progression of the game of golf. I mean, the stars of yesteryear made a fraction of what stars today are, right?
Correct.
So I'd like to, the 1.5 billion, I mean, you know, people use that term like that's just a lot of money, and it is, but that's revenue. You have expense behind that.
Correct.
Okay, so talk about how the 1.5 million in general, I mean, just, you know, gross terms, how you generate the 1.5 million revenue, the TV revenue, you know, what you get from tournaments when you sanction the events. I mean, just tell us a little bit how you know, what the revenue stream is, how difficult it is to bring in that revenue stream year in and year out, how you've grown that over the decades, you know, how prize money has increased, and, you know, quite honestly, how you had to increase dramatically the prize money to retain the players under the threat of LIV. I mean, that also put the tour's ability to fund this stuff at risk, but just kind of describe the business model.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator. Our business model is predicated on media revenues and sponsorship revenues, and that drives over 80% of our gross revenues. We have some other form of revenues, you know, admissions, hospitalities, tournaments, licensing revenues, our tournament players clubs, but it's primarily predicated on media and sponsorship.
And by the way, the same media could pay for viewership rights for the other tours.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
And they do to a certain extent, but not at the level that the PGA Tour garners.
That's correct. And, you know, and they're trusting us when they enter into those agreements that we're going to deliver an excellent field of players to them, and it's going to include our top players or a strong representation of our top players. And so we've had some loyal players. We've had a strong group of loyal players that have remained with us, and we're very proud of that. And as we talked about earlier, we're going to make sure those players are recognized. But if LIV stays in existence and continues to take our top players from us, that will put pressure on our ability to retain those media revenues and those sponsorship revenues. They could decline in the future if LIV, that is the existential threat. And if they decline, it declines the earnings opportunities not only for those top players, but for all players. That's the threat that we faced, and that's what we're trying to work through.
Yeah, again, that's the existential threat the
Yes,
tour still faces. You need to understand that. This threat has not gone away.
That's correct.
You know, Mr. Dunn, just speculate. If you're not able to conclude this deal, and by the way, this thing has to be concluded by the end of this year, correct? Or else, again, the lawsuits aren't reinitiated,
That's correct.
but LIV can, you know, once again re-engage in trying to attract more and more players and continue to build their tour at the expense of the PGA Tour. I mean, you just kind of talk about what's going through the players' minds right now.
Well, understandably, the players were shocked, and the real problem was the initial announcement. What should have been said is, LIV and the PGA Tour have agreed to settle their lawsuits. They're terminated with prejudice, so we win. We win those cases, and they agree to have discussions where PIF could be an investor, a minority investor in potentially an ongoing entity. That would have been great.
Just real quick, though, you didn't really have a choice whether or not you could announce this. I mean, the lawsuits are going to be dismissed. That was going to be a public court filing.
Right.
So you had to make an announcement.
Well,
We kind of acknowledged the fact that you maybe didn't make the announcement the way you would have liked, so people started speculating.
That's right.
Like you had a hard deal here, but you don't have a hard deal.
We have no agreement. We have agreement to possibly get to an agreement. So I think the way it was announced, which was really bad, okay, everybody jumped to a conclusion, maybe even this body, that, they're selling to this. We're not, but we are really trying to figure out the right thing to do for our players and the global game of golf. And by the way, we'll try hard to get an agreement, and I'm hopeful that we will. If we don't, we'll have to go through some other. We'll have to accept that we're going to have to go back and compete, and we'll have to do it, and we'll do it.
By the way, I've got a great deal of interest in this, and so I've been following the news pretty carefully. I've certainly sensed a softening, at least by some players, after they got over the initial shock, when they start realizing the situation you're in, and how you're trying to preserve what's in their best interest. The game of golf. Is that
they said that sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. I mean, when the facts come out. And, in hindsight, I wish we had put and we couldn't because you're not allowed to do it, but I wish we had put the agreement out day one and everybody could see that there's no there.
Right.
And I think, Ron, you might have said at the player meeting we were both at in a couple weeks ago in Connecticut, that if we had just announced what it was, it would have been fine. But, everybody's to blame for that. I'll take my share of blame for that, too.
I wouldn't beat up on yourself too bad on that. There's been a lot made of that tentative disparagement clause. First of all, Mr. Dunn, you've done a lot of deals. That's not unusual to have an anti-disparagement clause in any agreement, right?
Senator, it is very common because it's hard to get an agreement with someone if you're saying bad things about them by the pendency of the agreement. I understand the sensitivity to it, and I think it's worth consideration, and I applaud Senator Blumenthal for raising it because, in this country, we believe in free speech, and we do. This has a very short term. If we'll get to a deal, terrific. If we don't, it's gone.
By the way, there's nothing the PGA Tour can do to bind players to a disparagement. I mean, they've got freedom of speech, correct? I'm not even sure there's anything you can do to bind certain members of the board. I mean, you might be able to bind the organization not from issuing public releases. I mean, Mr. Price, what is your understanding of really what would be the enforceability of any anti-disparagement or disparagement clause?
We do not plan to enforce anything against our players for speaking their mind. They're free to speak their mind.
But again, I mean, how enforceable would it be against any member of the board or individuals as opposed to the organization?
I'm not an attorney, but, I would think board members are free to speak their mind.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I just took this opportunity to give the representatives of the PGA here a little chance to, once again, highlight the reality situations, some of their business model, how they generate revenue, how crucial it is that they're able to retain the top players and this thing doesn't splinter off to two separate tours. I thought they did a good job doing that, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks. Thanks, Senator Johnson. Thinking a little bit about some of your responses on the way over to vote and back. First, thanks to Mr. Dunn for understanding the concerns that I have raised. I guess my feeling is these are concerns about free expression. They're concerns about the players and about your fans, about the game that you so dearly love. Isn't it better to have these concerns aired before you're locked into an agreement?
Senator Blumenthal, I'm a grateful American citizen. If you ask me to come and see, I'm going to come and answer all your questions. Yeah, whatever you say, I'm happy to answer any questions and work as the best I can to help the PGA Tour and help the game of golf and help what we're doing.
Better to know what the concerns of the American people are before you are straitjacketed and locked into an agreement that may, in fact, unfairly and even illegally bind you, your players, sponsors, and others.
Senator Blumenthal, we appreciate everybody's interest and appreciate your involvement, and thank you.
By the way, I cited the statement by John Rahm. I think the general feeling I'm quoting is that a lot of people feel a bit of betrayal from management. Have other players, Mr. Price, expressed those kinds of concerns to you?
Thank you, Senator. Due to the confidential nature of settling the litigation and signing the framework agreement, we surprised a lot of people, including our players. So we've had a lot of work to do to make sure that our players understand what we did and why we did it. They're very interested in that. Our players are starting to understand why we did it. They're starting to see the significant benefits for them and the game of golf and all of our constituents if we can move from the framework agreement to the definitive agreement. But they're still very interested in the terms. They want to make sure we're in control.
Have you received anything in writing from any of the players?
I have not personally received anything.
Well, has the PGA Tour received anything in writing from any of the players?
I don't see everything that goes to our other executives, so I can't.
Are you aware of communications in writing from your players? We understand there have been.
There certainly could have been, yes, because
There could have
players
been.
were surprised.
Have you seen any?
No, I don't recall seeing any.
Have you heard about any?
I've heard about a lot of discussions about players being surprised.
Could you make them available to this committee?
If they're written communications, we certainly will make those available.
Thank you. What would you say to the players who feel blindsided and betrayed?
Thank you, Senator. It's what we have been saying. We've been explaining why the negotiations had to be confidential and what the benefits were to entering into the framework agreement. And a lot of players, not all, are beginning to understand exactly why we had to do it and how this would be beneficial for them and charity and all of our constituents.
They're beginning to understand.
Yes, sir.
All of them?
Not all. We still have some work to do. Not all players agree on everything. We're a big membership organization and we represent a lot of different players.
How many players did you notify in advance of reaching the agreement?
I don't believe any players were
None?
notified. No, sir.
Not a single player was notified? You're a membership organization. Your members are the players. You don't exist without the players, but you didn't tell a single one of them about the negotiations, let alone what the result would be before you announced it publicly?
It was the settlement of litigation, which was binding, and then we've told the players that we would go through a process of making them fully involved in anything we do relative to the definitive agreement, which we're in the process of doing.
Mr. Dunn, you said in an interview, I think it was last year, quote, "If someone is willing to pay incredibly uneconomic prices, they will be unbelievably disruptive," end quote. You said that, I believe, correct?
Senator, I have the full faith that if you're saying it, it's right. I don't remember what it was in reference to, but it makes sense.
It seems to me that you were, in effect, saying there that the Saudis were willing to pay money without regard to the economic profit or revenue, correct?
Correct.
In other words, their interest was public image, sports washing, cleansing a reputation, correct?
Senator, I can't speak to the mind of what their intent was, but I know if you have a lot of something, you tend to be a little sloppier about it. So if you have,
They have a lot of money.
they got a lot. I mean, a lot. And so when you have like, when it's like anything else, if you're down to your last $10, you watch it carefully. If you got,
And that's how they can be disruptive, because they got a lot of money, buckets full of money, correct? Because they don't have to care about the economic results. They're a total autocracy. They don't have to care about paying players. They'll just do it out of those buckets full of money, and that will continue with their dominant financial interests, their equity ownership of the PGA Tour through this profit-making entity that will control financially whatever the board of directors composition may be. So just looking at it from the future standpoint, you're not out of the woods. They're going to continue to have this kind of bucket full of money, and they're going to continue to kind of wield the influence that they do. That's the word that was used in the official documents. And whatever the good intentions and the rhetoric now, you still have to reach a deal. And so my hope is that you will resist those bucket full of money. I think a lot of players, a lot of sponsors, a lot of charities, and frankly, the 9/11 families are hoping that the PGA Tour will stand up and frankly avoid the sellout that this deal seems to be. Because that disruptive, uneconomic effect is exactly what we need to resist as a nation. If we're going to be selling out to countries that can throw around hundreds of billions of dollars, we're going to lose. Not just financially, we're going to lose in terms of our democracy and freedom. And institutions like golf, sports are central to our society, to our culture, to our economy, to our way of life, to our self-image, and our image abroad. And for all the reasons that you have very eloquently described your love of golf, it can't exist as an institution in this country if people are not willing to stand up for it, just like other sports and other institutions. You know, the 9/11 families, a number of them are here today, and they've asked for a meeting with you. Would you commit to meet with them?
yes.
And do you have anything maybe that you'd want to say to them now, as long as a number of them are here?
Senator, I will say now what I said on September 12th of '01, what I said to my children growing up. Anyone remotely involved, anyone tangentially involved, anyone who profited, anyone who was involved, we should pursue them with extreme prejudice to the full extent, to the complete capacity. And over the years, I want to thank President Bush, I want to thank President Obama, I want to thank the magnificent United States military, I want to thank the special services that have executed that with prejudice, I honestly believe that our government, with both President Bush, President Obama, our military, and the brilliant, brilliant SEALs, did their job. And anyone that is involved with that thing has answered justice. I'd go on to say that with my own children, I thought it's been incredibly important to them to understand that because someone has the same skin color or the same religion as the people that were involved in, the criminals that were involved in 9/11, that doesn't mean we hate them. That we're raised in the United States of America that has different values, and we look at things differently. And when I grew up, in our house, we had a sign, "No Irish need apply." And that was something my mother instilled us, so that we just had a taste of what was that like when, because of religion or heritage, you didn't get something that you deserved. And I'm very proud that a friend of mine once said that my second son said that he had never, ever heard me say one negative remark about any Middle Eastern, any Muslim religion, anything like that. And I'm very proud of that. I think America stands for something different. I think if someone does a crime, you go after him. For this crime, it's death. I absolutely I believe that our special services did their job, and I'm grateful to them, but I will refuse to describe a whole nother people because they had common religion or skin color. I'm not doing that under any condition.
Thank you for those remarks. You know, I want to make clear that we're not here about the people of Saudi Arabia. We're here because the regime, an autocratic, repressive regime, is torturing, imprisoning, killing its own people because they are different and because they express their views or because they are women. And they have fostered the war in Yemen, and also there is mounting evidence, I think persuasive evidence, that the Saudi government was complicit in the 9/11 attack. And the families who are here are seeking justice against that regime. And the materials you've just been handed, which also went to Senator Johnson, I would suggest you have a look at. But the point is that the Senate actually has supported them. Senator Cornyn and I led the effort, it's called JASTA, to enable those families to go to court so that our courts would have jurisdiction in their quest for justice. We passed that bill, and then we passed it again when President Obama vetoed it. Senator Cornyn and I led that effort. And the materials that you've been handed reflect a lack of cooperation from some of the agencies in our own government in providing information that those 9/11 families need, seeking simple justice against Saudi Arabia. It's not the reason we're here today, but it reflects many of those reasons. So my hope is that you will support that effort of the families to seek justice. I'm glad that you are committed to meet with them, and the passion that you've expressed in support of our military and our other security services, because I think every member of the Senate shares those views, and it ought to bring us together. Senator Johnson, did you have any other questions?
My closing comments, first of all, is I do think this hearing has been constructive in a number of different ways. It's given the PGA Tour an opportunity to, describe the rock and the hard place they were between and still are in, okay? This has got a long way to go. But many senators were able to express their concerns that I think the PGA Tour shares. So I think that was good. I would push back on the term sellout. PGA Tour did not seek this. They were put in this position. The Saudis have the $700 billion. If they want to be involved in golf, they will be involved in golf. And if this thing fails, they can spend the money to take over golf. And I think that'd be tragic, and I think it would destroy golf because it would destroy the competitive spirit and the purity of the competition. So I appreciate the difficult nature of what you did, Mr. Dunn, in first reaching out and starting it. I understand the difficult nature of your task ahead of you, Mr. Price, to conclude this negotiation. I really do hope that we can give them this time and space and the privacy, working with their members, now that the members are fully aware of where they're going, to conclude this deal. And I think there's a real potential here. Again, this has been negotiated by somebody who, I guess, other than losing a direct member of the family, I mean, losing 40% of your colleagues is no small thing. You understand the full sensitivities. I don't think Mr. Dunn would be involved with people that had any involvement whatsoever. So I trust his judgment from that standpoint. And I hope we can, I guess, trust these individuals to do right by their members, by this country, by the 9/11 families, try and preserve the game of golf, competition at the highest levels, and see if we can't forge some kind of win-win situation where even the citizens of Saudi Arabia can enjoy greater freedom, greater modernity, where the game of golf can be used, as I know Mr. Dunn believes it really can be used, to bridge divides and just improve the situation. So again, I wouldn't have held this hearing. I was highly interested in attending it and listening to it. I think some good has come of it. I think it's been constructive, so I appreciate that. And let's give them the time and space to conclude a deal that can be actually a win-win situation for everybody involved.
We appreciate your being here. Thank you, Senator Johnson. We've learned a lot, and we've also learned we need to learn more. And so we're going to continue this inquiry. We're going to ask that the other potential witnesses that we invited actually come and share their perspectives and information. I assume you would support that effort?
You're talking about Yasa and yeah,
Yes.
I'm here.
Thank you. The more we know, the more we can support the values and freedoms that we have espoused here today and the ideals of professional golf and the PGA Tour, which we supported. I supported. When you asked me to meet in Cromwell, Connecticut, I was all in.
Yes, you were. Thank you for that.
And I will continue to support the PGA Tour. Just make no mistake, as I said before, America is on your side. We will support you. It shouldn't be about the money, the disruption, the uneconomic offers. And so I recognize that you can't say you're going to walk away from this deal, but I hope you bargain hard. And we will continue this inquiry because I think uncovering more of the facts and shining a spotlight on what's really happening here is in the national interest and part of our obligation. Thank you very much. This hearing is
Thank you.
going to
Thank
be,
you both.
is going to be adjourned, and the record will remain open for 2 weeks for any written questions that are submitted, the responses to Senator Hawley, and responses to other questions. And again, we're very grateful to you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.